We're going to record our session today. And I'm going to take a second to share my screen. There we are. Welcome everyone to Main Street, Rhode Island Roundtable for March 27th, 2025. We're talking about facade improvement more than skin deep with our guest presenter from East Providence. Just going to, whoops, thank our sponsors, our generous sponsors for today, Rhode Island Commerce and Rhode Island Energy, who is a sponsor of the entire Main Street, Rhode Island program. For anyone who may be new, what we're talking about with Main Street, I encourage you to look up Main Street America. They have developed a four-point approach to Main Street revitalization and cultivation, really looking at all aspects of place that make commercial districts successful, which includes economic vitality, our businesses, also includes the built environment, but also includes communication, events, storytelling, and then people and organization, how all the work gets done. So really, as we are rolling out this Main Street Rhode Island program, looking to touch on all 4 points. So wanted to share why I'm excited about this topic today. I wanted to fully disclose that I was heavily involved in a facade improvement program in the city of Central Falls, and found it to be a challenging but fascinating experience. So I'm excited to talk more about it today. And also make sure everyone knows that the Commerce Rhode Island Main Street Streetscape Improvement Fund applications are due tomorrow, which is a source of funding for programs like this. So everyone check it out if you haven't already. I will be sharing some links in the chat, kind of assuming as a starting point that we, agree that the built environment has major impacts on physical and mental health and also economic development. So uh, just taking that as a given for our conversation today. And that I'll also be sharing a couple links that have shown how facade and storefront improvement programs benefit not only the individual businesses, but also the property owners, the municipality, the community as a whole, and give kind of validation to why these types of programs are so popular in so many of our plans, revitalization or economic development plans. And with all that said, I am very happy to welcome our presenter for today, Tristan Jimerson. He is the Business Development and Economic Opportunity Coordinator for the City of East Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you so much for being here. He's going to tell us all about the city's recently completed storefront improvement program. So I will stop sharing my screen and invite Tristan to share yours.
Yeah, sure this is okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving up your lunch hour to come and watch me talk about the storefront improvement program in City of East Providence. So, and Jillian, and you can see everything. You can see the. Okay, great. So, to kind of quick introduction. My name is Tristan Jimerson. I work for the City of East Providence. I work in the Planning and Economic Development Department. I am the Business Development and Economic Opportunity Coordinator, and I was the manager for the second half of a 2-year storefront improvement grant. It was an ARPA-funded grant. A little bit about me. I have about 18 years of experience in small business and 5 years in economic development. I came in to manage the last half of this program and ended up closing it out through December of last year. Melissa Spur, she was the one that managed the first half of the program, created the design guidelines, and kind of set stuff up. Unfortunately, she was not able to be here with us today to talk about it, but you all are stuck with me. So our storefront improvement, the program's intent was to provide business owners impacted by the pandemic a boost to their visibility and an increase in foot traffic, to honor the nostalgia by restoring the small town look and feel that people in East Providence remember and love, to reverse the damage done by decades of disinvestment and neglect. This program is part of a larger strategy for the city to reinvest in our business corridors and the neighborhoods that surround them. So the goal of this was mainly storefront restoration. but it was also partially business retention post-pandemic and partially a way to attract new businesses to East Providence. Those were kind of the unstated sub-goals of this. So the targeted industries, there were guidelines from ARPA that matched what we wanted to accomplish. We were targeting food service, restaurants, personal care service, so massage, anything like nails, anything that would be impacted negatively by the fact that we couldn't be around each other for many years. Entertainment, arts, recreation, and accommodation. We see these as social hub businesses, and on central corridors, they kind of form the backbone of neighborhoods. Kind of a quick overview of what the grant was. So this grant offered up to $40,000 for storefront improvement projects with a 25% match. For projects $10,000 and under, we offered a 0% match. And we did prioritize specific census tracts to kind of hone a little bit where we wanted the money to go. The program or the projects that were covered were exterior painting and lighting, ADA compliant entryways, window replacement and restoration, architectural restoration, new storefront construction within an existing building, enhanced window displays, and excess asphalt removal and landscaping, and murals. We dispersed over 850,000 ARPA dollars in this program, and we assisted over 35 businesses. I think the final total will be 37 or 38 once the last few projects are complete. And we believe the program did achieve its stated goals. I think it was a highly successful program. We received a lot of positive feedback on it. The visual impact was definitely there. Right? We joke that you can drive down any street in East Providence and eventually you will hit a business that was affected by this grant. So our methodology in terms of selection, applications were selected on a first come, first serve basis. They were scored on a rubric based on census tracts, type of business, design guidelines, and street visibility. Applicants were required to provide a minimum of 2 bids for each separate project that they were proposing. And then high scoring applications were presented to the Economic Development Committee for final approval. After approval, funds were dispersed in 3 stages, 50% at project start, 25% at midpoint, and 25% at completion. There are a couple additional levels of approval in there, but they don't all fit on the slide, and we are municipal government, so things do take a little bit. But the planning office had feedback or had an opportunity to approve. The mayor's office had an opportunity to approve. So a lot of eyes were on every single project before anything got started. So here's. So as you can see from our lovely little sizzle reel, there were some dramatic changes. A lot of these buildings had fallen into disrepair. We were able to kind of breathe new life into a lot of these businesses that had been staples of the community for a long time, and hopefully now they will continue to serve the community going into the future. We were able to attract a few new businesses to the city and help them restore storefronts that needed a lot of work, and welcome them to our community as well. So there are a couple observations we had from running this program. The first one we call the gift card effect. which was in addition to the 25% match, grant recipients often took on additional building repairs and projects. So the businesses that were getting the full 40,000 and doing a large scale project, such as an entire facade, entire new windows, they would often update other things as well. Interior things that were not covered by the grant. We saw roofing replaced, sometimes $20,000 to $30,000 over what their match was. So that was a great motivator. If we can put in 40,000 and then we see an $80,000 investment in a building, we see that as a very good use of funds. It's a good deal for the business owner. We get to see more improvement out of it. They're able to do certain things that weren't covered by the grant at the same time, just kind of minimize the construction time and effect on customers coming into their business. The second was word of mouth. So we did a lot of social media, newsletters, flyering, and other outreach, but word of mouth was definitely the most effective way to get the word out. Mainly is that we saw a spike in applications every time a noticeable project was completed. Small business owners do talk, they talk to each other, and when someone gets a new sign, they say, "Where'd you get that?" And they go, "Oh, the city helped me out." And then all of a sudden, we're getting calls in the planning office, we're getting applications coming in. "I didn't know about this." It's like, well, it's been a year, it's been available for a year and a half. So glad you're getting on board now. But that was definitely the most effective way to get the word out. The last is visual impact. So new signage and murals had the biggest visual impact. We received more positive feedback from those projects than any other. You saw in the video, the Miller's roast beef, we still get lots of comments on that. Things where it's just like a big, fresh update to a local institution. And we see a big drive in application numbers when those things are completed as well. So the challenges we faced in this program, windows and parking lots. They were high cost and low visual impact. Windows, if you are unaware, are very, very expensive. Oftentimes could eat up the full 40,000 for projects if someone had a large glass facade. Oftentimes those projects were not, I don't want to say not worth it, but the visual impact was much lower than a mural or a big signage. The same with asphalt removal or restoration on parking lots, like anything that's on a flat surface, you don't really notice it when you drive by, even with the increase in landscaping. And for the cost for the visual improvement, the balance wasn't quite there. We did have challenges with the upfront disbursement structure. So if a project was canceled, working with contractors, things get delayed. And with upfront disbursements, that meant that if something was canceled, that we had to do clawbacks, which if you have worked in lending or any sort of, as soon as the money's out there, it is difficult it becomes a longer process to get it back. Luckily, we didn't have very many of those, but the ones that we did took up a lot of man hours. Obviously, there are exceptions to these. So, for example, in the Windows case, we have a flower shop, Gilmore's Flowers. They create these beautiful floral window displays right as you come into the city. And when we replaced their windows, it just increased the visual impact of those displays. So I wouldn't say just don't do windows or parking lots, but just make sure that it will enhance the building. And the same with the upfront disbursements. The positive side of that was that if a business was brand new or they just didn't have the money to start a project, because they would have to float, $15,000 to get something going, this was a nice option for them to be able to just, get a lot of those businesses that as soon as you say, well, you're going to have to contribute this, they're like, never mind, I can't do it. I can't afford it. The other issue we ran into was the fact that this was not a reimbursement grant. So where we struggled with that was with new businesses. Oftentimes they were getting ready to open and they were opening on a tight timeline. Now, managing a grant of this size with the levels of approval and contractors and all of the steps you have to go through, these things sometimes can take longer than they wanted. And if they had a hard opening date, they would often move ahead with the project before all the approvals had come through. When that happened, we could no longer fund the project because it was not a reimbursement grant, which led to some, unfortunate situations where they wanted to work with something, we wanted to work with them, but because of the timing, that wasn't able to be worked out. So 5 takeaways. The first one was $10,000 projects can have just as much visual impact as $40,000 ones. Some of the most impactful projects were actually on the cheaper side, and that's really more focused on the signage and mural and some kind of painting, some basic facade restoration. The second is dispersing the first payment at 50% completion rather than when the project starts will save you a lot of headache. Don't disperse anything until everyone's committed and the work has started. Um, 3, to avoid expensive and less visually impactful projects, kind of what we were talking about earlier, windows and asphalt removal. And the fourth is maybe find for kind of as funding gets more scarce, fine tuning the targeting. We use census tracts, which did work for us, but I think the program could have had a more intense visual impact if we just selected 1 or 2 main streets and just focused the money on those places. You'd be able to restore multiple storefronts in a row, which enhances the impact that this money could do. And the last, if possible, provide a list of trustworthy vendors to the businesses. This is something we found that would have been very helpful for the businesses. As a municipality, we have to be careful because we can't recommend people. We can, so we're not able to provide that. But oftentimes businesses, they didn't know a muralist. They didn't know a sign maker. So they would just go with whoever they could find on Google. And that did lead to some issues with some with contractor issues. If these people weren't vetted, haven't done any projects before, sometimes the businesses weren't happy with working with them, or they just kind of ghosted them and disappeared. If we could provide a list of trustworthy vendors to the business that we had worked with before or had done other projects, I think that would have really helped the businesses in the initial stages of getting bids. Getting 2 bids is minimum is pretty standard for government work, but a lot of the businesses had never done that before. So that was something that they weren't used to doing. They weren't used to asking for bids. They are used to working with one person and just going with whoever they get first. Small business owners don't have a lot of time to do extra research. So anything that you're able to do to help them out in that part, I think would speed up the process greatly. And then let's see. So I've attached some additional materials. We have our internal rubric of how we were rating each of the applications. We have a short flyer and then our entire design guidelines. Can you guys see these? Okay. For some reason, they're showing up totally blank on my screen. So I can also send any materials that we used out to whoever wants them. If you want to reference them or use them or kind of see how we set this up, we're totally fine sharing all of that with you. We also have the design guidelines. These were put together by Melissa Spur. And if you've worked with design guidelines before, this won't be any, this is kind of standard, but talking about elements of the storefront, why the program, and then gets into the nitty gritty of here are the awnings that we would recommend. Here's the signage that we would recommend. Examples of good signs, good exterior lighting, exterior surfaces, paint. So kind of all of the little details for each project were contained in here.
Yeah, are these all still available on your website?
I don't believe so. Since we stopped taking applications, a lot of these things have come down, but I can send them out to whoever wants them directly.
Oh, nice.
Okay. So, and that's it for me. If anyone has any questions or comments or wants to talk about a specific project or kind of how we were thinking about this as we closed it out, feel free to let me know.
All right, yeah, we have lots of time for questions. So I see there's some in the chat. So um, do you want to start talking about who the applicants were? Um,
Sure.
saying are they the businesses or the building owners? Um,
Yes.
yeah.
So, yes, that is a good point. So for this program, it was only for the businesses. So we did see a few times where a landlord would ask or maybe pressure their tenant to apply. We also had situations where we would do work on the building, like we always had to get the landlord's approval, but we would do work on a building, we would increase the quality of the building for that business, and then the landlord would raise the rent of that business. So that is one thing to keep in mind is to either potentially open it up for landlords to use it to improve their buildings, or to have some sort of written agreement that if the landlord agrees to it, then I mean, if they can't raise the rent for a year, I don't know. I mean, that was only a problem in one situation. But yeah, the way that it was structured was strictly businesses.
Oh, interesting. So the question is, could you elaborate on the relationship between the two entities when taking on facade improvements
Between businesses and
and
landlords
landlords? Yeah. Or yeah, property owners.
or tenants, yes. So yeah, so if a business applied, they could propose a project. We had to have written approval from the landlord because we were going to be making changes to the building. Once the landlord gave their written approval, then they were not really involved in the process anymore. So they signed off on it and then we were able to move forward.
Nice. Curious. So would they how detailed would the proposal be that the landlord had to sign off on?
So when the landlord would sign off on it, I mean, it would depend on the tenant because the tenant would be the one that would be having the conversation with the landlord. So I think that usually it was verbal and then they would just send a letter, but oftentimes the landlord would want to see the design documents. But all of that had to be provided anyway before the project started. So it
Mm.
was not really an issue to provide that to the landlord. And in our experience, 95% of the landlords were totally fine with it because they just saw it as an improvement to their building, that they didn't have to pay for, which landlords love.
Right. All right, someone's asking if you could please run the video montage again.
Oh, sure.
And these are so these were spread out throughout the city.
Within the income tracks,
Hmm.
but they were kind of spread. They were some on Waterman, some on Taunton, some more into neighborhoods.
Wow.
So Joe's Automotive is actually a good example of someone that ended up spending a lot more money than they anticipated. So for this project, we did the sign and the garage door facades, but he redid all of the siding. He did the roof. He repaved parts of the lot. And by the end of it, he was like, I think you tricked me because I just spent $60,000 to upgrade this building. And it's like, well, that's good. Now you don't have to upgrade it for another, you know, 30 years.
All right. So maybe we should stop screen sharing so we can focus on our conversation. Um, so next question, something I was wondering about. So if we're not going to use a facade program for something like Windows, um, or when we were in Central Falls, what we discovered was that some of the repairs, even for like a new door or something like that, a lot that we're such old building stock that there were structural repairs that needed to be done before it could sustain like the weight of new windows or doors. And
Yes.
um, so are you aware, or is anyone, I guess anyone aware, of uh, addressing some of those needs, if facade improvement isn't the appropriate vehicle for doing that?
I'm not aware of funding available I think that the way that we would approach it is we would say that the city is interested in investing in the facade. We will invest this much, but in order to do that, you need to invest this much. And as a landlord or owner of the building, hopefully they see that the if there are structural issues, those will need to be fixed eventually. And that if they do it now, there's an opportunity to save money on other things by having the city fund some of it.
All right. There is another question. If a revolving fund sort of arrangement might have helped businesses become involved in such a project, especially if it was reimbursement-based grant.
Yes, I mean, since they were ARPA funds, they come with the strings that were attached to ARPA funds. We would love to set up a revolving grant for facade improvements because not, you know, luckily we weren't at the point where we were like knocking doors to just say, hey, can we fix your building? That we had enough buildings to fix up. But having a revolving fund so that you can be a choosier with projects and areas that you want to focus on. For example, if you had a building that was vacant and waiting for a tenant, you might not want to repair the building, but once a tenant had signed a lease, you could immediately work with them as they were opening, especially if you change the non-reimbursement status to kind of fund their new signage, paint the building, new mural, whatever they wanted to do, landscaping. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the revolving fund would be a great idea, but with this funding provided by ARPA, we were limited in scope.
Awesome. All right. So let's open it up to everyone. I see a couple of folks from Providence on here. I know Ben is with us from North Kingstown, um, who's been working on a program like on Post Road. I see Marilyn from West Warwick. Um, Love to hear. So, what questions you have for Tristan, and what may have been your experience working in programs like this?
Maybe I'll start. Ted Carr here in the city of Providence. First of all, just great investment, high return. I mean, I just think it just. I'm assuming you're just all very pleased, but what a great program to have. And we have the similar challenges with some of our neighborhoods and businesses here, so we're trying to figure out how to do it. And I'm sitting here knowing we have a loan program in the city, and we can't do bricks and mortar, but where can we leverage that in some way on these other improvements, and how do we do that? That a lot of that CDBG money for us, but it just seems just congratulations to you. This is a great use of the money.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else have questions?
Questions.
Let's see. Ben, you want to hop on and talk about your program too? He says sure.
Putting them on the spot.
Yeah. Yay!
Can you guys hear me and see me? Is it all working?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Well, hello everybody. We have a post road facade improvement program that happens for Post Road specifically for our district. and it's going through a lot of changes. It looks like you guys have gotten wonderful results. And then I was struck by some of the things that you were saying in terms of improvements. Um, we too have dealt with a lot of people wanting to improve parking lots and things of that nature. But I can also attest to the fact that the more dramatic differences are typically things that are not on the ground and on facades. That's the stuff that is more visible to everybody, which seems obvious. But a lot of people are trying to kind of figure out how to stretch their dollar and how to get things to work. And so they see these opportunities, and sometimes there's a bit of a challenge trying to kind of get a component that we are hoping for and that will benefit them. So a lot of times when we have people who come to us just trying to figure out parking lot things, we say, are you willing to do some greenery and some green space in the front, or some facade improvements of that nature, so that we can feel more enthused about going after a parking lot improvement or something of that nature. So that was one of the things that I noticed that we actually have very similarly to you. Of course, it is always beneficial when we see people expend more money above and beyond what is being allocated. One of the challenges that we're running into lately, or the adaptations, I guess I should say, is that we have recently had a board come into play for the Post Road area. So they organized themselves as a 501(c)(6), so the League of Business, a nonprofit league of businesses for-profit business. And right now they're trying to figure out how to kind of get those how to make the money work the best for them, right? There's a finite amount of money in the pot, and if you have everybody we don't, have this problem very often because people aren't using the maximum amount that they can of the program. But the fear is if, you have a bunch of people use the maximum amount and use up all those resources, how can we most equitably get the stuff for everybody, essentially, is what we're dealing with. So we are kind of messing around with caps and things of that nature, and considering lowering the cap so that more businesses can take a swing at using the program. And finally, there's a kind of unique challenge of how do you do that while understanding that when people spend more money, it obviously looks better, and encouraging that. So there's a bit of an ebb and flow that we've found that we are dealing with on that.
Yeah, I mean that's totally understandable. We ran into the exact same thing, and that's where the kind of levels of approval and the design guidelines really helped, where we could push back on things and say, look, this doesn't meet the design guidelines. We're not going to fund this project.
Mhm.
But it really is a case by case basis. Sometimes, I mean, there are like the situation with the flower shop and those windows, where it's like if you just said we're just not going to do windows, then they would miss out on that. And I'm sure there's situations with parking lots where they are eyesores, and
Mhm.
that would be a huge difference. But it depends on the parking lot, and it's kind of hard to, yeah, I understand it's hard to codify that into a set of rules that you can apply to a program. But
And one that you could explain to people, who may be in different states of acceptance, right? I kind of like
yes.
always think that people go through the 5 stages of denial when it comes to a
Hmm.
lot of these things.
Yeah.
And the amount of people who are not reading the complete applications necessarily in the beginning, I will say that one of my biggest frustrations is when somebody has undertaken a project. We have a reimbursement component to ours as well, which means we need to approve it prior to them commencing work.
Hmm.
And it is one of the most disheartening things for me personally when somebody comes with a project that they've completed. I know it looks great. I've driven past it, and I wonder, is this going to end up on my desk in a second? And it does. And then they haven't read the beginning, which says, you need to submit it prior, and we can't take a swing at it. And that's frustrating. And it's also difficult because we are in the business of helping people, right? Like we are in the business of creating opportunities. Um, and then you kind of have to deal with a little bit of fallout, right? Because sometimes like these people are disheartened, and then what's a great program on paper, they go and they like you were talking about earlier, right? Word of mouth is a very powerful thing. Now you have somebody grumbling about, oh well, I went and applied for it, but they wouldn't, and it's like, okay, guys, like we got to figure out how to, nip that in the bud. So developing ways to have more direct communication and making it so that we're really approachable, I think, is something that we found is really, really important. Just so we can try to make sure, we remind people of things that they already know. When you remind them, oh yeah,
Yeah.
of course I know. But then, let's say people will come to you, and not have done any of the first initial steps. So,
Well, that brings up a great question for both of you. How did you advertise the program? how did people end up hearing about it besides word of mouth? I mean, what were your efforts?
Uh, Do you want, I can get, yeah. For us, we ended up kind of utilizing social medias and things of that nature, but then really kind of hammering down a lot of the relationships, right? Sometimes, um, your local chamber can be a boon and a benefit, or they can see you as a source of competition.
Mm.
And we've gone through some changes recently with our recent chamber. And so we are making sure that we have a stronger, the strongest relationship we can possibly have with them so that we have unified information sharing. And I think that's one of the things that we found is really important is just kind of reinforcing like, no, we're an asset for everybody. We don't have membership that we subscribe to particularly. It's not a board that we're answering to. It's a full municipality, right? And just making sure that people are aware that we're on everybody's side, you know, um, and kind of encouraging different organizations to have the pieces that can kind of, be that roadmap for people to link to and hopefully pay us that call and say, hey, what's going on with this, or how do I, do this in the best way possible.
Tristan, I feel like there were a lot of articles. Like when I Googled East Providence Facade Improvement Program, there were a lot, it seemed like you got a lot of press.
Yeah, we did get a lot of great press from it. And I think that some of that came, I mean, the mayor is very outspoken on this stuff. He loves talking about it. He's got the newsletter. He's out shaking hands with every business owner, telling them about it. Um, so that we have the direct outreach, and I was out there, and Melissa was out there as well. But I think one of the things that really helped us is when you have kind of an early success, an anchor success, like Miller's roast beef, and every time someone sees it, they go, "What's that?
Mm.
Where did that come from?" And then they point them back to this program. So that's where it's like a highly visible initial success will boost whatever program you have
That's
for
why
the rest of its in lifetime.
someone posted in the chat that they recently passed by Miller's and thought that the sign was different and better. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is a great looking sign.
So I'm
And
curious about, can you hear me?
Yep.
We're
Yep.
sharing a computer here. So, about, all of those businesses or districts that that might not have the benefit of being able to the resources to organize such a program, like what are you kind of alluded to a couple of things, but what are the highest impact, lowest cost facade improvements that a business can take on? What does that look like?
I mean, signs and paint.
Mm.
The like you can get a
Shaking
lot
heads.
with signs and paint. If you signs can push past 10,000, but paint makes a world of difference on even if it was if you had no budget and or the smallest budget possible, I would limit it as just paint and murals. Artists they don't charge you very much. And if you have good ones, especially local ones, they can do a lot of work in neighborhoods for very low cost, you know.
I would also say like awnings and planters
Mhm.
are two things that we found make a big difference. Awnings a little bit more specific, right? That's more of a case to case basis. If you have and specifically, I'm talking about plazas. I'll be
Mhm.
straight up with you guys. But when you have big plazas where they have like holes in their awnings, or you can see metal frames or things like that, um, that's the type of subconscious things that people don't necessarily like pinpoint, but it makes all the difference in terms of like revitalizing and making a place feel a different class level, right? It's suddenly you feel like you're in a first world place rather than a second or a third world place. It just gets away from that dingy, beat up, kind of a feeling. And then the other one that I would say would be planters, right? Um, Green, like humans, we are kind of drawn to green and to life.
Mm.
And it really helps. And so one of the things that we found is sometimes it's really minor things. Somebody's doing a parking lot, say, hey, can you do like one of those like the horse trough, like the silver horse buckets, right?
Mm.
Somebody gets one of those, they put some beautiful flowers in there and some plants, right? And they put it in front of their store, and suddenly you have like a central location, right? And kind of a unifying factor. If you have a couple of people do that, businesses, it creates like a whole, a little bit of cohesion, and that goes a long way. And the reason I mention that is because it's also something that's relatively affordable, right? In the grand scheme of things. So those would be just my 2 cents in regards to that. And the other thing, and sorry not to talk too much, but that I would say is that make it so that there's a trail to your success, right? Like what Tristan has said about having a great project to succeed in the beginning, and everybody kind of looks at that. Um, I absolutely agree with that. We went and took it a step further. We've got signs made, like the lawn signs and things of that nature, that says, Post Road Facade Improvement Program, and names the
Hmm.
program and has our, coat of arms and all that type of stuff. So when people drive by it, there's like a little cue to them to be like, oh, okay, maybe that's what we had to deal with it. And then they know kind of the proper channels to get in touch with. And if you have a couple of those signs, right, people will start noticing some of these consistencies along your road and be like, it just reinforces that curiosity and encourages people to take that first step, which for some reason people are more hesitant now to do than ever, despite having more access to information than ever.
Mm. That's a great idea. Tristan, did you have a kind of marker like that?
No, we didn't. That is a great idea. No, we ended up just kind of using like collecting photographs and doing kind of before and afters. But it was mainly internal, and then when we would present in the newsletter at the end of the entire project. But yeah, having a little plaque or a little like kind of window decal that you could add to the door to just say this facade was improved by this program, and with a QR code of how to access it. I think that's a fantastic idea. And now I'm actually kind of annoyed that we didn't do that. That would have been great.
I'm curious also, did you receive any criticism or I mean, were there kind of opponents to rolling out the program? And if so, did you respond?
Um, so I wasn't here for the rollout.
Mm,
That was Melissa that was here for that. But I think that the criticisms that I saw levied at the program were that we weren't giving preference to businesses that had been in the city longer,
mm,
that wasn't taken into consideration, which I have opinions on, but I believe that that is correct, that is the way, you don't, I'm, if you've lived here for a long time, it doesn't entitle you to special rights. Like we do things on a first come by first served basis. The other criticism is since we were only working with tenants, was that what happens if they go out of business?
mm.
Is it worth the investment if they're going to close? And from our point of view, it's that the facade has been improved. Whether they stay in business or someone else comes and replaces them, that facade still has been improved.
Um, I don't know if you want me to keep speaking to our
Yeah,
program,
go
but
Oh no.
ahead.
one of the biggest issues that I would say, and we have had similar to that, and kind of what I mentioned earlier with people who don't read through the application and see that first box that says like send this to somebody before you pull the trigger on everything. Um, but I would say that one of the issues that we have found is encouraging people to finish the work. Timeframes can be a little bit difficult for some people, and there are a lot of moving pieces, so I totally understand why. So just making sure that we are flexible on our side, but that can be a little tricky when you have like a finite pot of money and a first come, first serve, right?
Mm,
So it's all about being preemptive and looking at what's coming down the pipeline and understanding that sometimes people will approach you for a project that sounds really great on paper and it's never going to go anywhere.
mm,
Yeah.
And figuring out how to identify those so that you don't have sunk, you're not tying resources to something that's not going to, come to fruition. That's one of the things that I would say has presented, been a challenge in various instances.
mm,
And kind of playing off Ben's point, one thing that we did, which I didn't talk about in there, is once a project was approved and the funds were dispersed and construction had started, we did put a limit on on how long they had. I think it was a year to complete the project. And if it wasn't completed within that time, then we weren't going to pay the rest of it out.
mm.
And I think that a year was maybe too generous. We only had a few that really got delayed a bunch, but 6 months to really kind of light the fire under people to get the work done, I think is always helpful because yeah, when you have a limited pot of money, you don't want money to be in limbo on, you want to be able to get it out and to people that are actually going to use it.
Yep.
Well, anyone else have questions as we're talking here? Feel free to jump in or throw them in the chat.
This might
Um,
be like an impossible question, so
can't hear you,
feel free.
Caroline.
Oh,
Um,
this
Okay.
might be an impossible question, so maybe feel free to like say, "Oh, I don't know." But I'm just curious, like if you, Tristan and Ben, were to imagine yourselves not in your current jobs, but suddenly the head of a volunteer group
Mhm.
of like a neighborhood association, like with this a vision of what your Main Street could be. How would you, what would organizing the businesses along your Main Street maybe look like to kind of tackle some of these projects and do them without a coordinating effort?
I mean, I think that, you'd have to, I would establish a vision of what the street would look like. So, how you have kind of a unified look, a unified brand, a unified design document of like, here's what all of these businesses would look like, because you'd be doing it as a project all together. Then I would get all the businesses on board, make sure that everybody liked the way that that looked and get them excited about it. And then whatever sort of contractors you needed, maybe you have someone local that paints, maybe and you can get them excited about it too. And then figure out a way that, okay, if everyone pitches in $5,000, $10,000, then we can get this all done. But then it would be coming from the businesses if you don't have any outside funding at all.
Mm.
But I think you'd have to be a little bit of a salesperson and sell the dream, sell the vision.
I would say that we are in a slightly different position, largely because, we have two different big areas that we kind of consider oftentimes, which would be Wickford, and Post Road. And they have so many overlays on them in terms of like historic character, especially Wickford in particular.
Mm.
That's one of those where we don't have to think on that side as much. I'm not trying to give you a cop out, just kind of a reality, right? Because they're going to run through that process anyway, you know? So it does kind of impact that slightly. We are also really benefited by, and I would say that one of the things that we worked really hard to do was to encourage Post Road to create a Post Road merchant group, like I was mentioning a little bit earlier. That's largely because Wickford had one, right?
Mm.
And having your different economic zones be able to represent themselves and have a voice, and understanding that you don't want to have that isn't your kingdom, right? You want them to operate autonomously so they can, represent themselves to your town council and to you and to all that type of stuff with a voice, because sometimes you're not going to be able to say yes, right? You need to have that back and forth. Everybody's not always on the same page or with the same goals in mind. But when you have them talking, even if they don't get along, right, they're able to come to some type of consensus. That I think makes the biggest difference, for us and for people being on the same page. And then not to kind of go backwards, but the other thing that we have identified as that can be a little bit difficult, um, is it's a reimbursement program for us, right? So one of the issues that we can run into on occasion is somebody's got a grand idea or they want to do something, or they're a struggling business, right? We've just identified three different positions that somebody can be in. And oh wait, that costs money, right? Because yes, we are taking half off, but we are taking half off after they've paid for something,
Mm.
right? It's a reimbursement process. So if people don't have that upfront capital, that can provide an issue, right? That can be a barrier. And that's one of the reasons and one of the areas where we're trying to figure out ways to kind of strengthen other resources for them, right? So not to put the cart in front of the horse, and things are moving forward and this stuff's being developed, right? But like some of our business groups have expressed interest in developing a fund on their own, right? That they can use to put up the upfront cost for these businesses, right? So that and then we reimburse. And it's just us figuring out how to make that work on everybody's page, right? So they can kind of take that initial swing. And obviously you're adding another element in, right? And that third element means that there's got to be a relationship between that business owner and that third element, because that's where that money is going, right? We're just doing the reimbursement, but that somebody's got to get repaid on this end. But when you have that relationship and they can trust each other and they can have that reimbursement, suddenly businesses that might not have been able to afford that sign, right? They might be the ones who benefit from it the most.
Mm.
So you really want to figure out ways to make it so these people can take a swing at something that they might not think they can take a swing at, right? And if you can figure out a way to make it so that that money is built into the community and they're not having to go necessarily take out a loan with a crazy, interest and appreciation rate, that's going to make things easier and more accessible to people.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Please, everyone, feel free to jump in. I'm curious if, in your experience or anyone on the call's experience, these types of opportunities also represent opportunities to engage with um, like other programs. And we have Andrea Mosher here from Rhode Island Energy. I know she does work on energy efficiency improvements. Also, statewide planning has some disaster preparedness and resiliency programs. Did those types of conversations come up in I mean, if you're dealing with just the facade, I curious, just yeah.
I mean, and Andrea and I actually met yesterday and talked about this exact thing. So,
Oh
Andrea, do you want to talk about the kind of where EP is and all this stuff?
wow.
Oh,
Oh no, we can't hear you.
oh,
Is that any better?
yep.
Yes,
There you go.
Okay.
perfect.
Yeah, so I work in our energy efficiency programs at Rhode Island Energy. I know a lot of you, but not all of you. So we have been working with East Providence, and Tristan has been a great just another voice on the street for us, right? So that when he's talking to businesses and it seems like they have some other energy things going on. We were talking, one of the things came up yesterday was an ice cream shop, right? Where I think he was talking to them about awnings, but then we also kind of got to talking about like their refrigeration needs. In terms of facade, right? So we always want people to be thinking about energy efficiency and the fact that they're paying into the energy efficiency fund, and there might be some energy incentive programs. The truth, like the uncomfortable truth, is that facades are hard. There's not a ton of energy savings. So there might be some weatherization, insulation, kind of air sealing type things. We definitely want to look at. Tristan mentioned that windows are really expensive, and so that's a problem for our programs, right? We have it's just not cost effective use, right? Usually, not always, but usually it's just the amount of energy that you're saving versus the cost of the window generally means it's not something that it's going to qualify for an energy. So that's we haven't solved that one yet. Maybe we will.
I think
Um,
the pitch that I was giving businesses, especially the businesses that were taking advantage of the storefront improvement project, is that if you're going to have construction, you might as well get as much of it done as you can. And that's what's like, get an energy audit. Because it's like, even if the work isn't facade based, if it's interior based, like if we're going to be painting the front of your business, like, or, restoring the front of the business or adding new things, like get the HVAC fixed, get everything, anything you can do while this is happening, it'll just make things easier in the long run.
All the disruption at once. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, while you're focused on it. Yeah.
And I think also just like encouraging people to do, right? Parking lots are kind of the easiest example to think of, but like sometimes people want to resurface their parking lot. And the reality is, right, our stipulation is something to qualify has to be visible from them. So we're not interested in like the back of the parking, the parking lot behind their business, for example. We probably won't do swinging and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, incentivizing businesses, right? So that like you're like, hey guys, do this as a bulk cost and all at once is going to save you money in the long run rather than doing this now and year that.
And I think we're losing you. Your screen started flickering a little bit. Oh, you might want to try. Um, oh, no. Um, yes, I think the point he was making was that, right, you've got like a storefront program. It has to be visible from the front, right? That makes sense. Um, we are starting to run out of time, so I want to make sure anyone who hasn't spoken yet has an opportunity to jump on and contribute a thought or question. Okay. All right. You can feel free to cut me off, I guess. Yeah. So one thing Tristan and I were just musing about before was what, you know, where funding comes from now that, um, ARPA's not there. Is this, what are the buckets of thought? Like certainly we're talking about could the city make more of a general investment in keeping up the program at a smaller scale? Anyone else have thoughts about? I mean, Tristan, you want to jump in? So some of the
I mean,
things we were talking about, how we fund these things, even on smaller scales.
reducing building a revolving fund, reducing the overall amount of the project you'll take on,
Yep.
and you could also greatly increase the match.
Mm,
So it becomes more of a business owner comes to the city with a project and says, I'd like to do this. What can the city do? You can say, okay, well, if you're going to pay, 50% of it, we can contribute up to 10,000 or whatever the match is. But just like a much higher match makes it it means that there'll be less projects that you'll
mm.
do. But if you have less money to do projects, then it's kind of the way it is. And when we're not talking ARPA, when we're talking municipal budgets, that things are pretty tight on that level. So we'll see. I mean, we hope that I hope that we'll be able to get some more money in the storefront improvement pot. It's been a great program, but it's not going to. We're not going to give out $850,000 again. Not on a municipal budget. It'll be
They're not.
much, much, much less than that. Um, but now at least we have the structure of how we would set that up when we do replenish those funds in whatever way, and we know what changes we would make.
That's great. Well, Tristan, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for
Oh,
sharing all this information about your program. Yeah, it really felt like 35 to 38 is a lot. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, really impressive. And we're so glad to hear about it, and we'll be happy to, if you want to share with us some of those documents, we can
Of
share them
course.
with those who came today. And and just to let everyone know, also next month's roundtable is going to be pretty fun, I think. We're bringing back the Connecticut Main Street Center to give us a presentation called A Day in the Life of a Main Street Manager. So as you two were talking earlier about organizing within a place to try to mobilize some of this work and have the the businesses in the place taking the ownership of the of getting these things done. Obviously Main Street is a model that could be considered for that purpose. And if you had someone who was running that effort, what would they do? So that's what the topic next month will be about. That's going to be April 24th again at noon on Zoom. So Ben, I want a special shout out to you too. Thank you so much for contributing your experience. So great to have you as well and all of you with us today. And great. Thanks so much. It's 1 o'clock. We're ending on time. And have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Oh, I have to end the recording. Recording.